And then Sony back on, going great guns with great experiences. 2008, LittleBigPlanet, as Alex, the head engineer from Media Molecule, and like, look at the graphics. Like, again, we saw an early version of this at a big Sony conference, dev conference, and just the render quality that someone like Alex could manage to get out of the PlayStation 3. It still looks beautiful now, doesn't it? Yeah, it's amazing. And like, the physics-based gameplay, the construction, and they created that, don't they? That play, create, share. And like, for 10 years afterwards, like, so many game developers would have a 3-word, summary of what their experience was. Yeah, kill, build, destroy again, or whatever, whatever it was. Yeah, and it was just an awesome product. And like, my team, we got the chance to work on the PSP version with Alex and Media Molecule, and they were a great team, incredibly talented team, incredibly good to work with, and we had an amazingly good fun experience squeezing their vision onto the PSP and trying to be as true to it as we could, but also exploit what made PSP unique. Yeah, but it was just an amazing. There it is. Play, create, share. An amazingly realised product by an amazingly talented team. And there weren't that many of them, yeah. And again, one of the lessons from something like Media Molecule is if you get some people together, really enthusiastic, really moving forward fast, with great ideas, and sometimes you can have some great stuff come out of it. Same year, Civilization. And Civilization Revolution I picked, which a load of Civilization fans will want to admonish me for. But I just love the pop, slightly more commercial interface, slightly broadening the audience. It worked really, really well on PlayStation. And at this point, I was running a PlayStation studio, and I'd work in the day. And I think sometimes I played this game all night long and then carried on working. It was ridiculous. It was so incredibly addictive. The gameplay was so well tuned. The kind of cultural elements, it was so fun. It was just irresistible. You'd be coming out of your Stone Age and making your first iron tools, and an Egyptian jet fighter would fly over your territory, and you'd be like, oh my God. Do you know what I mean? How have they advanced so fast, And it was just a great fun realization of building a world and building a culture, and still going super strong today. There's so many fans, and there's Sid Meier there, great designer. And then is that only a year later, and like Naughty Dog done a really good job with Uncharted 1, yeah, and it had really stolen a march on some of the big third-person action adventures that I think Europe had been doing at the time, Sony Europe and stuff. And but it was 8.5, wasn't it? Maybe Uncharted 1, and but Uncharted 2 was just like a mind-blowingly, maybe the best sequel of all time. It was a mind-blowingly well-realised game, action adventure. Characterization was brilliant, technically on every level. Uncharted and the guys at Naughty Dog, team at Naughty Dog, was just above what anyone else was doing, and technically they've always been incredibly strong. The engineering backbone of their studio, and from the first big train, they remember the train carriage disaster. It's even before the kind of gamers got underway, and just personally for me. I thought it was my favourite of the whole franchise, yeah. And it was the kind of game that, like, when you were at Sony at the time, you were proud to be at Sony, and it would set the benchmark to a level that you thought, I'm going to try and do something as good as that. And then a game that, like, totally different, Scribblenauts. I don't know if you know about Scribblenauts, or ever played a Scribblenauts game. The first time a Scribblenauts game turned up in our office, we couldn't believe it. You could just write anything and it would appear in the game, and people would spend all lunchtime trying to write something. I remember writing the music star George Michael riding a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Yeah, I wrote that, and he turned up in the game. It wasn't the answer to solving the puzzle at the time, yeah, but he turned up, and it was in a really, and it was a game that you'd show to one of your lead engineers to go, how are they doing that? Whatever I'm writing is turning up. You know, how is it working? I still love to know exactly how they did it. And I think, again, it's an area that like is ripe for a game in a similar space, because, you know, the graphics weren't out of reach for a small team, and the scale of the game wasn't out of reach for a small team. They just had this incredible piece of code technology in their engine that enabled you to write a butterfly, and a butterfly would appear, or, you know, whatever came into your head. And yeah, very definitely deserves its place in the 100 list. And then Jan said to me, you haven't got enough mobile, which is totally right. Yeah, you haven't got enough mobile, because I've spent a lot of my career not in console and PC rather than kind of mobile, but, you know, obviously I've done some mobile stuff, and got loads of friends that have worked in the mobile space. And, you know, you can't not have Angry Birds, I think. You know, why do I think it is on the list? Because I think, just like for you know, decades, PC was the home of the first-person shooter and the home of the point-and-click strategy game. And, you know, people tried to do kind of first-person shooters on their phone, didn't they? And it never really, the controls, you know, it wasn't the best, was it? And I think Angry Birds was one of those games where it perfectly suited the interface. Tap, pull, fire. You know, it was like the perfect mobile game in terms of interface, wasn't it? Yeah. And guess what? It was incredibly popular. It spawned 2 or 3 movies, I think, and countless games. And I think actually, like, because Sega owns Rovio now, don't they? And I think they're actually realizing they've kind of like done so many kind of Angry Birds spin-offs that there might be time to kind of park some of them a little bit, and you know, and like, you know, that they've kind of, there's people who've got Angry Birds fatigue. It's become so used in so many games. And then the same year, very different, Borderlands. Yeah, and the reason I put Borderlands on is from the very first games until, yeah, still very recently, people have been kind of pursuing, haven't they? Or some people have been pursuing kind of photorealism. You know, making every model more detailed, more realistic. Their rendering engine's better, more realistic. You know, high definition, and, you know, beyond HDR. You know, beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond. And Borderlands came out, and it had a really specific style, didn't it? Yeah, it had this really big kind of comic book, big and bold, non-photorealistic style, which I thought was, at the time, I thought was amazing. It's like go a totally different place. And also, it had a really great sense of humour, great characterization, you know, and it was just such a rich world rendered in such a unique and fun visual style that I think it was one of those games that made people think, actually, we don't have to chase the, you know, million dollar photorealistic path at all times. You know, we can still do core fun play. So there's a great franchise, and I was really pleased that the last one seems to be going really strong, and they've managed to keep their graphic style but update it for you know, latest PCs and latest consoles. And then Red Dead Redemption 67, 2010, just an amazing game, yeah, in every way. And, you know, they took a lot of GTA stuff and transposed it to the American West, didn't they? But it transposed to the American West really brilliantly. And, you know, it was and people had always said people don't like Western games, Westerns. People don't like Westerns. People had always said that. And but then someone does a brilliant one that's like being in a Clint Eastwood film, or a spaghetti Western, or, you know, every great Western you've seen. And, you know, it was just brilliant. But beyond that, Like they had their spin-off, didn't they? Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare, where they kind of just stuffed the world full of zombies, and kind of a very similar game structure again. But I thought it was one of the best zombie horror games ever made, and like so I've made that number 68, and I thought it perfectly replicated something that you see in loads and loads of kind of zombie books, comics, films, TV shows that never really been really well replicated in a game, of that thing of entering a new space. Yeah, like you'd enter the town like on the left there at dusk, and you maybe fire your gun, and and then the first undead zombie would stagger out of a building in the distance and start shambling towards you, and then before you knew it, you were in the scene on the right. And it was just so evocative, and so like the beginning of Day of the Dead by George Romero, which is a very classic, famous zombie movie, or any number of great zombie kind of shows. That I thought it was just the best. It was just like I think I played that and like double finished it. It was incredible experience, and the fact that it was just an add-on to an already brilliant game was amazing to me at the time. And then, is it the same year? Yes, same year. You just finished that, and then you get straight into Mass Effect 2, which I thought was just an incredibly well realised, character, RPG, space opera, massively influential to loads of other games that followed on. And and like that, I think there is talk of Mass Effect 4, isn't there, which would be brilliant, because 3 wasn't quite as impactful as 2, but like 2 was amazing. And then another one you have to have on the list, BioShock, like kind of half RPG, half horror game, half, there's no, it doesn't make sense, half something else. Great kind of atmospherics, great mood, scary, great gameplay, really good narrative, super evocative, like a kind of an adult Tim Burton-esque experience, and probably the best of the BioShocks. Yeah, just for pure quality, it was brilliant.